Okay, here are some more examples of using stored paths in the external dispatcher application. So first we're going to look at making a train in a siding wait for more than one oncoming train. So let's just create a train here. Let's make this guy eastbound. And we need a couple of oncoming trains. So westbound, another westbound. Okay, so we have two westbound trains. Let's just clear a path for them now. So they will have clear path down the main at Bissell, and we have our train in the siding at Bissell. So we're going to route the train in the siding at Bissell out onto the main, and we are going to left click the main at Bissell to designate it as the trigger. But this time we want this guy to wait for two oncoming trains. So we're going to left click that, change that number to 2, and now both of these trains are going to have to hit that trigger block before this guy's path will execute and he'll be able to leave the siding. So let's watch this play out. So the first train hits that trigger block, the number of trains he's waiting for drops by 1, and then when the second train hits the trigger block, that will drop to 0, and his route out onto the main will be lined. And there we go. Okay, for the next example, let's look at a couple of trains fighting it out for Kern Junction. So let's put an eastbound UP train on the main up here, and an eastbound BNSF train on the main down here. Stop that for now. So what we're going to do here is first we're going to line the BNSF train through the junction. Just left click on the train to immediately clear that path. Next we're going to line the UP train out, but because we want him to wait until after the BNSF train has gone through, we're going to store this path by designating this block here at Kern Junction as the trigger. So we left click that block, that becomes the trigger block for this stored path. And so now if we watch this play out, the BNSF train will go through first. When the train hits that trigger block, that will trigger this path, then the UP train can follow it. So start that up. First train goes through. That triggers the path. You can see the switch flashing there. As soon as this block is clear, and this is actually quite a long block if you have a look within run 8. So there you go, it's clear. So now within the next few seconds, that switch throws, the UP train can now follow. Alright, let's delete those trains and try again. Drop that signal. This time let's have 3 trains. Let's stop that. So let's put our UP train back there again, eastbound. BNSF, eastbound. Let's put a second BNSF train. Okay, same scenario as before, but this time, for whatever reason, we're going to put the UP train in between the two BNSF trains. So this guy can go through first. He's clear just to go through. So we'll left click on the train just to clear that path. We know that this guy is going to go through. We'll left click here. Once again, just set that as the trigger. We'll store that path. And now we need to store a path for this train, because he's going to follow the UP train. We'll use the same trigger block, so we'll left click this block again. This will be the trigger. But this guy needs 2 trains to hit that trigger block. So this one will hit that trigger block first. That will drop this number to 0. Trigger his path. The UP train will be able to go through. The UP train will hit this block. That's the second train to hit that block. So that will drop this down to 0. Also, another thing to note, is that this switch and this signal will only change when this block is clear, but it can take up to 10 seconds for the dispatcher app to actually throw a switch, and which will drop that signal after this block is cleared. So there could be a window of up to 10 seconds where this following train might see an approach signal here, and we don't want that. So we're going to have this signal drop to red. There's two ways we can do that. We can either double right click on this train and down here select drop to red, and every signal that this train passes will drop to red. That's kind of annoying though, because we know this train is going to have several trains following him up the hill, so we don't want to do that. So instead, we're going to right click on this signal and just tell the signal to drop to red when a train goes by. And so now when this train goes by, that will drop to red, and there'll be no danger of this following train seeing an approach signal for any amount of time while it's waiting for this path to actually clear. So let's watch that play out. So the first train goes through, that triggers this path and drops this number by 1. If I tap the H key to hide the trains, I can see it's also dropped this signal to red. So once this block is clear, within a few seconds, this switch will be thrown and the UP train will be able to proceed through. And when he hits this block, that triggers the final path. So if I tap the H key again, I can now hide the trains and see that the signal and switch at Kern are now flashing, waiting for this train to clear. And now that the block's clear, the switch is thrown, the signal clears, and the third train can proceed through. So, one more quick scenario here. So we spoke briefly about two ways to cause a signal to drop to red. Let's look at another way. Let's stop this train here. Stop these trains. Let's create two eastbound trains, one following the other. East. Okay. So this guy has a clear path through Bina. Let's say we want this following train to stop at Bina after the first train goes through. So we've seen the two ways to do that already. Either telling this train to drop all the signals that it passes to red, which is annoying when there's a following train. We can go to this signal at Bina and tell it to drop to red when a train passes it. There is another way, and that is that whenever you create a path, so let's create a path here. If the final block of the path has a signal at the end of it, when that path is cleared, it will drop that signal to red. So if I clear this path, it drops that signal to red. And so we're going to use that to use a stored path to stop this second train at Bina. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to store a path that goes just to the block at Bina, and because that block ends with a signal, when that path is cleared, that will drop that signal to red. And so we want to not clear this immediately because we don't want to drop that signal right now. We're going to store this path, and as a trigger block, let's select this block out here. So I'm going to left click on this block, designate it as a trigger. So now when this first train hits this trigger block, that will cause this path to be triggered, which will drop this signal for the second train. So let's watch that play out. And I probably could have put the trains a little closer. Okay, getting closer. Okay, here comes our first train. So that's about to hit our trigger block. And that's executed our path, which only went up to this block, and that's dropped that signal on the second train. So let's see an example of why we might actually ever do this. Let's delete these trains. So let's create two trains again. So we've got two eastbounds. Now let's say we have a westbound over here somewhere. Okay, so the situation is we have westbound train at Caliente, two eastbounds over here. So let's say we want the first meet to happen at Ilmon between this train and this train, and then the second meet to happen at Bina between this train and our following train. So the way we do that is, first of all, we would route our first train into the siding and the first eastbound onto the main. You notice as well that when you highlight a train, if it's too long for the siding or the main, you'll get the crossover there. So we know that this train wouldn't fit into the siding. This train does, so let's put this guy on the main. And just like before, we want to hold this train at Bina, so we're going to use a stored path here, just like before, set this as the trigger, so that will drop that signal on the following train, and he'll be held at Bina. So let's slow time down a bit so we can talk through this as it's happening. So we've got our trains routed in. Let's also route them out. So we know that this train is going to go through the siding, and then it's going onto the second track at Bina, and then it's a UP train, so let's put him down there. We can trigger this path when our eastbound train hits the main there. So we left click here to select that as the trigger block. For our first eastbound train, he's already lined as far as the main at Ilmon. So let's line him past the main, and we can trigger this new path when our westbound train hits the siding at Ilmon. So we'll left click the siding, designate that as the trigger. So now this meet at Ilmon will happen with no more dispatcher intervention. We still have to deal with this train back here, but he has a stored path already, so we'll wait until that path is triggered, and then we'll work out what we're going to do with him. So here comes the westbound train. It's about to hit the siding at Ilmon. So that triggers the path that we'd stored for this guy. This interlocking here starts flashing as soon as the back of the train is in the siding. That will clear that signal and switch, and this train will have a clear path all the way through. We already have a stored path for this guy all the way through to Bakersfield. This will get triggered when this train hits our trigger block here on the main. Okay, this train has now triggered the path that was going to drop the signal at Bina for this guy. So we can now store another path for this train. So we'll right click on this. Let's set this all the way up to there. We know all the rest of the signals and switches are clear. So this path here, we can trigger this when the train that's currently in the siding at Ilmon gets out and hits this block here on the double track at Bina. So we'll designate that as the trigger. And so now the rest of this will play out with no more dispatcher intervention. There we go, one more path just got triggered, so our train at Ilmon will now be clear to exit the siding, continue on to the double track at Bina as soon as this interlocking here is clear. And then once he gets through and reaches this trigger block, this train will be cleared all the way through. Let's turn up the time a little bit. Yeah, I notice as well that even though our train here, if we hide the trains, it's facing a red signal, but he's not pink because he has a stored path, so the application knows that the dispatcher has already dealt with this train. And the final path is triggered. And there we go. If this had been set up in real time, the last path that we created for here, that would have happened at least 10 to 15 minutes before this train got through to here. So you can actually use stored paths to line things up well ahead of time.